Just really quick, I wanted to remind y'all that the Games and Online Harassment Hotline is here for you, for your friends, and your colleagues. We provide emotional support to folks who make or play games, which is such a broad range of people. So, you know, you might not need it today, but maybe you need it tomorrow. So we just want you to know about it. You can learn more at gameshotline.org.
I am the one who knocks. Like, we don't hear that and go, holy shit, like, he's really, like, lost his humanity. This is awful. We, and by we, I mean collectively, like, we as a society hear that or see that and go, fuck yeah.
Welcome to Feminist Frequency Radio, the hype machine.
That's our new slogan. That's it.
That's it. This is the show that asks you to be critical of the media you love or the media you hate or the media you feel neutral about. I'm Anita Sarkeesian, and I am joined today by two women who believe Goodfellas is a scathing indictment of toxic masculinity. Carolyn Pettit.
Hey.
And Ebony Adams.
What's up?
Is that true? I don't think that's true. I think that's a joke.
It's a
what,
joke.
About Goodfellas?
Yeah.
It's like I've never seen Goodfellas, but I think that's a joke.
Anita, you're messing up the hype machine start.
I mean, no.
So I wrote that, like, that's one of those, I intended as a joke, but after writing it or hearing it, I'm like, well, a lot of people, like, part of what we're talking about today is how a lot of people would actually think that it's true. So,
yeah. I figured, I just was like, I've never seen this movie. I think that this is a joke. Anyways, as you probably have not guessed yet, this week we are having a special topic episode, which means we're going to be talking about left reading, which is a tendency for folks on the left to ascribe progressive values to media we like that may not actually be progressive at all. Hello, friends.
Hey.
What's up?
I saw Ebony in Meat Space yesterday.
She did indeed.
Wow.
It was me. It was me. It was not my avatar. It was not my clone. It was not a simulacrum. It was me in the FLESH.
FLESH. Flesh.
Correct. Correct, Anita.
Yeah.
Good job.
Yeah, good. I can do it. I know how to spell. That was nice. I enjoyed that. But
It really was.
So last week we talked a lot about how the world is bad, and we got feedback from folks who like really appreciated that. And I just thank you for sending your feedback and your thoughts about it. And you know, I just want to say too that like shit's really bad, and like I'm struggling a little bit with like when I'm like, you know, I have ebbs and flows of being depressed, and when I'm not depressed, I'm like, do I engage with the world? Because I don't, like, because I'm kind of like, it's rare that I feel okay right now. And I was just listening to the news this morning. It was like, fuck. Like, it's so much. Like, it's so much all the time. And it's just horrifying about, like, I don't know, just the police murdering Black and brown folks just over and over constantly. Like, it's never fucking ending. And it's so hard to deal with the fact that we haven't why do we still have police? Like, can we just like get what, you know, like, and I just think about like, there's literally one of the biggest trials happening about this topic right now while you're doing this. Mm-hmm. Like it just, the cops, the police force are not reflecting on their behavior in any way or being more cautious, even out of like self-preservation, you know,
but there's no need for them to.
No,
I mean, the evidence, you know, is there. There's so little will to change things, to like radically change the way that our society operates. We keep getting like spit in the face by these people, and they just expect us to ask us for more because nothing will ever change. And if anything does change, it'll be some like mealy mouth, you know, police reforms, which just ultimately translate into more dollars for these militarized occupying forces.
One of the police reforms was like, oh fuck, what do they call them? The cameras they wear on their
body cams.
Body cams. Thank you. That was a reform. Yeah. Like that was literally made to try and prevent or like to hold accountability. But what has that fucking done? you know, like nothing. It's done nothing. It's just given us more like footage of the horrific violence as opposed to it like deterring or holding people accountable or what have you.
Yeah.
So fucking y'all, if you aren't on the abolition train, like get on it.
Yes.
Whew. I'm sorry. It's just, you know, yeah.
Yeah. All right. We're gonna now talk about something totally different.
Yeah.
Are we though?
Yeah.
Are we though?
I mean,
You
probably
know,
not.
like there's no way you're gonna have a topic like this in which I'm not going to bring up state violence and the cops. So will we
Absolutely,
be
that's
talking
true.
about something else? No, not if Ebony's in the chair and there's breath left in her body to talk about Cop-aganda.
That is true. Well, I am excited. Carolyn,
Yo.
You proposed this idea.
Yeah,
'cause
this
you're a
topic,
genius.
Which I'm sorry, what?
Because she's a genius.
She is. She's wonderful. It's a really, really good topic, and I'm excited that you suggested it. So why don't you get us started?
Sure. Let me start with a little story. About 9 years ago, a video game was released called Hotline Miami.
Oh boy, fucking hell.
I loved this game. And even if you ask me today, I will still say that its combination of druggy, neon-tinged aesthetics and twitchy gameplay set to an incredible electronica soundtrack can create an almost overwhelming sensory experience that's like very little else out there. The game is also incredibly violent, like ultra-violent, hyper-violent. But around the time of its release, I remember people saying things like this. After you finish each level, the music stops and you have to walk back to your car through all the carnage that you have caused. These are sobering moments that make you reflect on what you have done. And, you know, because I liked the game and I didn't want to feel weird about liking the game, I sort of bought into this for a little while. I was like, yeah, that's totally a thing that happens. But at a certain point, it was made clear to me that what I was doing was left reading the game. By that, I mean that I was ascribing values to the game that aren't actually part of its cultural impact or influence. 99.9% of Hotline Miami players were not pausing after each level to feel deep feelings and to think, wow, oh man, what I just did was really fucked up. This is seriously making me reflect on depictions of violence and how violence functions in our culture. For most players, it was an experience of, whoa, that was totally awesome. Let's fucking keep doing it. For most players, Hotline Miami is just another drop in the bucket of media that totally normalizes and glorifies brutal violence. And personally, I think very often those of us on the left ascribe progressive values to art that we like because we like it and we want it to be in line with our values. I think this happens a great deal with Breaking Bad. I think it happens with some of Scorsese's films like Goodfellas and The Wolf of Wall Street. And the reason I wanted us to do this topic now is because I recently watched the first 2 seasons of Succession on HBO. And clearly, for anyone who has watched Succession, the Roy family are in many ways supposed to be despicable. We are not meant to like them or admire them at all times and in all ways. And yet, watching it, I'm not convinced it's possible for us as viewers to not be seduced somewhat by them as well, by their lifestyle and their personalities. I mean, can you really have a truly anti-capitalist show, a billionaires should not exist show that focuses on the lives and lifestyle of an outrageously wealthy family? I'm not sure. So for me, the issue of left reading brings up so many interesting questions about how we relate to art, about where the line is between our personal experience of something and its actual cultural impact, and about what the responsibility of art is in this regard, and what role media literacy has to play in all this. So let's kick off this discussion with Ebony. You have certain works that I think are interesting and that you enjoy on some level. And, you know, maybe you question whether you ascribe values to them that they don't actually have, or you want to make a case for whether they actually can function as critical or not. Let's see, you know, what do you got?
Well, the stuff that I want to talk about is the 2 Equalizer films with Denzel Washington. So I'm not specifically talking about the TV show, the original TV show, or the new one with Queen Latifah. But I think, you know, my essential point will stand. about the franchise as a whole. So I just recently watched both of these films. I've talked before on the podcast about how I love action grandpa movies, but I should be completely clear. I rarely watch them all the way through. I just love that they exist, because the idea to me of like a waning kind of hyper masculine figure refusing to cede like his place on the social stage is hilarious to me. So as much as I enjoy like the Mission Impossible films, for instance, the fact that Tom Cruise is still out there like doing his own stunts, running his ass off, and fighting these much younger people, it makes me fall over in laughter. So that the genre appeals to me, whether it's, Liam Neeson in Taken, whether it's, Denzel Washington in the Equalizer films. But the thing that struck me as I was watching these films back to back, apart from the fact that the Equalizer 2 has my husband, Pedro Pascal, in it, is that in this current moment that we are living in, there's something so appealing to many people about the figure of the lone wolf vigilante, because it is almost impossible not to realize how deeply fucked up policing is in this country, the very structure of it, the resources invested within it, and yet, as a people, as a society, so many of us are so attached to the notion of retribution, vengeance, and punishment that if we do not have the police acting on our behalf, we demand a figure who will, issue justice for us in our name. And so you have a figure like Robert McCall, played by Denzel Washington. We rarely learn extensive parts of his backstory in these films, but you learn enough to know that he is former military, part of a former member of an elite unit of people who essentially do the business of U.S. imperialism. He is no longer engaged in that work. He is retired. And in the first film, he is now working at a big box hardware store, like a Lowe's or a Home Depot. And he gets slowly drawn back in to, unleashing the pain on these, horrible people who are taking advantage of people in his neighborhood, who have, violently assaulted a young sex worker played by Chloe Grace Moretz. And it's so interesting to me that at the same time, this film says, because there's an important moment in the first film wherein Robert McCall is taking on two corrupt cops, right? At the same time that this film says, cops are often as much or more responsible for the violence and, exploitation of people in their communities. Nevertheless, the idea is, or the message is, and I believe, McCall says this explicitly, like, you have betrayed the badge. You have betrayed what policing stands for. The very narrative structure of the film depends upon us understanding that things like the police are necessary because bad people need to be punished, and they need to be punished in very violent ways. And so the problem is not that there shouldn't be police, that there shouldn't be people exploiting folks, and not should not have the resources to exploit people, but that these are two particular bad cops. Then the second film is even more interesting, and that we learn more about McCall's past in the military. And it turns out, spoiler alert, that the folks responsible for the murder of his friend, who is from the State Department and has taken out other extrajudicial assassinations, is his former partner, played by my husband, Pedro Pascal. And what's interesting is that in films like this, we are meant to understand that anything that the protagonist does, because he is a good man, is therefore rational, legitimate, and reasonable. Whereas anything done by the person coded as the villain is then coded as unreasonable and excessive, right? But the film offers there's a way in which the film, again, like the first film with the police, depends upon like McCall's past in the military and the training that he achieved there, and doesn't really question the fact that the same things that Robert McCall does, he vilifies other people for doing, which is taking the law into their own hands and executing, just this incredibly violent vision of how a society should be. It's so fucked up, and yet it is incredibly appealing. And so I found myself watching The Equalizer 2, as I was entertained by the film, looking for ways that it would rest easier with me as a viewer, given my stated politics towards like anti-imperialism, anti-US colonialist efforts, anti-law enforcement, right? So I'm like, oh, well, the fact that Pedro Pascal's character gets to give this speech in which he says explicitly, like, you know what, I'm doing the exact same things that I did for the government, but now I'm doing them for myself. And when Robert McCall says, yeah, but, you were executing our enemies, and Pedro Pascal says, who says they were my enemies? I didn't say that. The government told me, and it's all random and it changes all the time, right? Just the fact that the film itself makes that statement is not enough to then affect the overall thrust of the narrative, which is that these forces are vital. The problem is just these, 3 or 4 men who have taken advantage of the system and who are using their power for the wrong ends. And by the wrong ends, we say not, adhering to the dictates of the state. It's fucked up. And so it's not so much that this is, that there's a left reading for this film, is that films like this, like Mission Impossible, like films like The Bourne Identity, in which our protagonist is fighting against the unseen but overwhelming forces of like surveillance, of espionage, etc. The issue is never with that force itself; it's with the few bad actors.
Right,
and this is incredibly problematic.
Yeah, and I think that gets at something too that, like, for me, when people will ask, like, well, if you don't think, Goodfellas, for instance, or if you don't think Breaking Bad functions as a critique, like why doesn't it, or what does a critique look like? What it comes back around to for me, or at least part of where I've sort of wound up, is that I think that if a work is going to actually like function as a critique, it has to show alternatives to brutal violence. You cannot use brutal violence as a means of like liberation, or a means away from like brutal violence, because we live in a society where, patriarchal violence is already baseline, like an accepted value. And so what we need to, to truly create, I think, media that's transformative or liberatory, is work that shows like true alternatives. So,
right.
Breaking Bad, as I want to talk about briefly, like, is a show where people face tremendous moral consequences for their actions. Like, people, like, it is very clear that, like, awful, like, like, you can absolutely see, Walter White paying a price, losing touch with himself, his own humanity, other people's lives being lost left and right by the hundreds, but yet we as a society, because we have this baseline value of like admiring domination and violence, we fucking love it when he says, I am the one who knocks. Like, we don't hear that and go, holy shit, like, he's really like lost his humanity. This is awful. We, and by we, I mean collectively, like, we as a society hear that or see that and go, fuck yeah, like, that is awesome. Walt, Heisenberg, whatever. And so, like, I think, and we remember those highs, and that, like, the thrill of, like, the badassery and the domination of, our hero or anti-hero way more ultimately than, we're seduced by that to such a degree that any comeuppance or what have you that they ultimately face, pales in comparison to what we feel in those moments. And that's not to say that I think Breaking Bad is a bad show or what have you. Like I don't. I think it's a good show. I just think when people talk about it as if it is this like this critique, this, morality play that functions to really like show a man's like moral downfall or whatever, and to really like make us reflect on that. I just don't think, and I think we may individually have that relationship to it and experience with it, but collectively, culturally, it absolutely just does not function that way.
Yeah, and it is important to note that, simply changing the face or the complexion of the messenger does not then, negate the force of the message itself. So if we're talking about cop shows, or if we're talking about, like assassins, or whatever, simply making your lead character a woman or a person of color does not then make the show or the project, radical or transformative in any way. Like, Black cops do nothing for me. Like, that doesn't change, ultimately anything about what's going on.
Mm-hmm.
I want to bring in a like slightly different take on left reading, or just like to add to the conversation, because I think that like what y'all are talking about is super interesting, and I love to be a witness to that. When I think of left reading, my mind goes to franchises like Star Wars and Harry Potter and even Lord of the Rings, which are these big epic stories that have no real politics in them. And you can debate me on that with Lord of the Rings if you want, but I'll fight you on the other ones. But they're like vessels for conflict as opposed to having a like real political position. So it's very easy for an audience, like those tend to be very, very appealing to such broad audiences from many different backgrounds and many different political perspectives, because they're blank stories ultimately. So, we can read Star Wars as, we're the rebels fighting against fascism, but the fascists can read it as they're the rebels fighting against like the indoctrination of, progressive politics or whatever.
Cancel culture.
You can. Yeah, right. Like it's the exact, and Harry Potter is the exact same way. And like I don't think you can have a franchise that's that huge, like globally, that isn't kind of generic. Because once you start making, like actually making statements about politics, and I mean that in a very broad way, like you're gonna lose people, and these are the types of franchises that don't want to lose anybody, right? That don't want to. That want to make sure that their appeal is so broad. And, like I'm not just making this up. Like I have actually heard stories from people who are like super like evangelical conservative Christians who are like, Star Wars is the best. Like we are fighting to like, protect Christianity and shit. And you're like, what the fuck are you talking about?
Yeah, well, I think it's not so much that the franchises or the stories within them, don't have politics within them, but rather that they don't, espouse a viewpoint that can't be, accepted by many different, ideologies and adopted as their own. Because I mean, someone could argue that like Harry Potter, for instance, the world that it sets up absolutely demonstrates, like a political mindset. I mean, you have like Hermione and the y'all, I only read like 3 or 4 of these books because I did not like them, but her trying to advocate for like freedom for the house elves, house goblins, house trolls.
Yeah,
y'all
and they
don't
do
hit
talk
me up
about,
on
like,
Twitter, right?
Muggles and stuff for sure.
But also, I mean, the stuff that like is explicitly in the text, like that, right? But then also the fact that the larger world that J.K. Rowling set up with the different magic schools, with like, one school on the whole continent of Africa, like that is a political choice that she has made. The choice that she makes to have like, who are the magic cops?
Yeah.
The ministry?
Like having, like having that is a political statement. The issue is that she doesn't sufficiently, because I don't think this is something that she would be interested in, and fuck her also. Let me make sure I get that out. But I think like the whole point of it is that, any reader can come to it and map their particular viewpoint onto it and their beliefs, right? But I do think, like, I just wanted to push back on there not being politics. I think that it is, but it's so malleable as to be, sand.
Yeah, and I'm really glad you did bring that up because I think everything is political, but you're right. Like that clarification is super important. And I think, like, yes, there are like in Harry Potter specifically, right? There are these examples that we can point to, but like I don't like I'm going to make a statement that I might regret.
Rob, whatever's coming next is going to be hot fire. Please keep it.
I just think that most like regressive people who are like politically regressive, like they don't think of themselves that way. Or like a lot of people who are racist don't think of themselves as racist, right? So like that it's really easy to be like, oh yeah, it's bad that they're against the Muggles. I mean, sorry, that they're like racist against not racist, whatever the fuck it is. I don't even know what I'm saying anymore. But the like, mudbloods, right? It's about like pure blood kind of blah, blah, blah. Like that's what the whole story is about. It's been a long time. I think it's really easy to just like attach that to whatever you believe and not internalize any of the like that's the whole point that we're talking about with left reading, right? Like you can literally attach your beliefs to all of these stories because the stories are so vacant and hollow. But Ebony, you're totally right. I just said that very long roundabout way.
Yeah.
Take as long as you need to tell me I'm right.
Ebony's often right.
But
except when Ebony's not right, she is crash and burn.
When I'm not right, I really still swing for the stands though, right? So I mean, I give it my all.
Ebony is often right when it comes to like politics, and she's really good at explaining shit. She gives the worst advice
when it comes.
Just the worst. Like, so don't ever ask Ebony for personal advice. Ever.
That is true. That is true. Also, do not accept my love PowerPoints. If I'm like, hey, I'd like to put a PowerPoint together of people that you should date
in a while. Did you? I know because during COVID.
You'd think I'd have more time, right? But I just have no heart in me. Anyways, back to the point, Carol. We interrupted you.
Back to the point.
Oh no! I mean, for me, I think, as I sort of said in the opening remarks, I think left reading, comes out often anyway, will come out of a desire to we as people on the left, we have very fiercely held beliefs. We believe that the world can be and should be better than what it is. We can see. We can see the transformative potential. We can see that things don't have to be the way they are, right? We can see that everything is the result of like human created systems that are fundamentally unjust and oppressive, and that if we created those unjust systems, we can create, better, more equitable, fairer, systems, and so when we really like something, I think, it's natural for us to want to believe that film or that, TV show or whatever it is in its own way contributing to making the world a little bit closer to the world, we want to live in. But I think I think we're often kidding ourselves because about the mainstream media that we love is actually like doing that rather than just reinforcing the status quo, which is almost always kind of what it's doing.
And there's so little this kind of reminds me of the conversations around representation too, right? Like there was so little historically representation of folks who aren't white, especially white men, and you latch onto stuff and you have to like do these internal like backflips to justify being a part of culture, right? Being a part of enjoying and
But it is so interesting, right? I mean, one of the things that I do want to offer here is that we are not arguing for the existence of like a homogenous audience reading of something.
Right.
It is absolutely possible for individuals to take different things from different media properties. And that's great.
Absolutely.
But, we're talking about like collective response as Caro is saying. But also like, how does this exist? Where does it come from and how does it exist? Where is it situated within the corpus of all the other media properties who, say similar things, right? So if you have an awesome show like Brian Fuller's Hannibal, the fact that Mess Mickelson is amazing and so charming and seductive as Hannibal Lecter does not take away from the fact that this is a brutal sociopath, murdering people for our enjoyment on the screen, for instance, right? So, I mean, like, you can read all kinds of things into the relationship between Hannibal and Will and Jack, whatever. Like, you can have amazing queer readings, anti-racist readings of things, but it's like, but what does the project itself support? At the end of the day, what is it saying? Not just what you want it to say,
right.
Not what you wish it had said,
right.
But what is it actually saying? Like, what is the infrastructure actually supporting? But having said that, I do think it's exciting when, there's something that would seem to be on its face pretty mainstream, pretty, white bread. And like, for whatever reason, like the queer community just embraces it, or Black Twitter just embraces it, right? And identifies something that it's like they have, they are living the death of the author in that moment. And they are trying to, they are wresting power, from potentially harmful, representations. I mean, I want to allow for the possibility of that as well.
100%.
Yeah. I think that that's such an important point, because we've talked about this before. Like, I think it's really important to people to have their own personal experiences to art, right? That we all read different things, and like, our podcast we do this every week. Like, each of us comes with different perspectives and experiences and reactions to what we've just watched or played or what have you. But I think that it's also really important that while we have that space for ourselves, we can still have a lens of like, what is the impact of this media on the mainstream, right?
Yeah,
like,
yeah.
Do you want to jump
Sorry,
in?
yeah. I mean, I guess in my mind, what I've done, I've created, and look, I don't want to. I'm a little wary of coming across like I'm sitting in some ivory tower, being judgmental of like the some sort of average viewer, because I'm not doing that. Like, I'm actually, when I think about left reading, I'm interrogating my own reactions as well. Like, I have that part in me that sees, sees like Walter White say, I'm the one who knocks, and feels that like that thrill of like, yeah, fuck yeah, dude. Like, I think there's a danger of being like, well, if only everyone were as smart as me and got what this is actually doing. Like, no, it's not that. But I do have the idea of a viewer, a sort of, default white male, let's say white male viewer who's kind of just, at the cultural norm point, going into a film. And I guess one of my questions is like, when I ask myself, is this film, does this film really effectively come across as feminist, or does it come across as anti-racist? Is I ask myself, would it make that viewer who harbors like, misogynist tendencies, or who harbors like, deeply like racist ideology, would it make them uncomfortable at all? Like, would it in any way like push back against their worldview, like in a way that they actually feel there in the audience as a viewer? And
I'm going to take that a step lighter.
Okay. And
say what I do. I'm like, not to like.
No.
I think about what the status quo is, right? So it's not even like it's a little bit less specific than what you're talking about. Is how I think about it. Is like, what is the status quo attitude in America today, for example? It doesn't have to be America, but that's what I'm using right now. And like, that's a little bit of a hard question to answer because of the like the quote unquote culture wars. But there's a general idea, right? So let's say 5 years ago, if you were to interrogate or do a survey about people watching Law and Order, they're not the average quote unquote average viewer. The majority of the viewers are not going to talk about Cop-aganda. They're not going to talk about the state always winning. They're not going to talk about all the things that we talk about, because that's not what like an average viewer thinks about. Right. They're not interacting with these kinds of ideas. They're not being exposed to these kinds of ideas. And so that's what I think about. Like, I love that we can all have our own personal takes on things, but I think we also need to be, and like the whole point of everything we're doing here is to like provide tools and context to understand that like the mainstream take on it as well. So like, while you might love something, it can still be harmful, or it can still have like harmful repercussions in terms of what it perpetuates socially.
Right.
Yeah, I think, one thing that is helpful in these conversations, though, is to remember that, like, when we talk about, like, the average audience, who are we talking about?
Yeah.
Because that's going to change from text to text.
Well, and that's why I don't like thinking about it as, like, the average.
Sure.
I like thinking about it as what is the status quo attitudes. And so the audience member doesn't matter as much as what is the norms of the way that we talk about and think about things, right? So, like, 5 years ago, we were not using the word white supremacy publicly. Like, that was a thing activists were saying. And like, you would get kind of like, everyone would feel a little uncomfortable. Now it's like on the radio and everyone's talking about it, right? So the status quo has shifted. And that means that our interpretations and what we're taking away from media is going to shift slightly.
But again, right, like when you talk about the status quo versus, different communities, and you say things like, white supremacy wasn't a phrase that was typically used in the mainstream. And it's like, okay, but what mainstream are you talking about, right? Because it absolutely is something used in like communities of color, like mainstream communities of color, So I just want to suggest that, like, and I think Cop-aganda is a huge one, because the ways in which crime procedurals, crime dramas, even crime sitcoms or police sitcoms like Brooklyn Nine-Nine, like, the way that it has taken ownership of our media, every network, every streaming service, it is amazing. It is frightening in a way. In many ways, it's frightening. But I think, depending upon the project within that genre, again, audiences are so different, and you have to ask, like, what is being asked of this audience and what is being offered to this audience, right? Because if there's any industry that is, doing tons of research on like who is consuming their properties, it's media, it is so money driven, it's like if women are watching our shows and they're between the ages of 18 and 34, then we want to find out precisely what they're watching and what they're responding to and give them more of that, right? And so it's interesting to think about like how different cultures and communities butt up against each other in their audience responses, and how that then leads to perhaps like new versions of it, different iterations of it. I think about like, you like science fiction TV. There's worlds different between something like Star Trek Discovery and I don't know, what's Seth MacFarlane's show?
The Orville.
Yeah, whatever. The doofus head. But
I would say that the audience, but even though the shows are different, I would say we can still apply a status, like we can still say, what is the status quo of society and how does that apply to the jokes or the comments or the themes that are being shared in those?
Yeah, absolutely. But I guess I would say that, if there is, some sort of cloud of, beliefs within that status quo, depending upon who the audience is judged to be, different ones are going to be emphasized more than others. Which I don't think any of us are arguing against that idea. I'm just wondering what that means for, the potential to find those ruptures in certain texts that do allow for entry that is, contrary to perhaps the stated aim. Or the undergirding assumptions, ways in which people like break in and take something apart and refashion it.
Yeah.
I'm just talking, y'all.
Sorry,
if anybody listen,
no,
I'm just talking.
Thinking, this is one of the problems with having like really good conversations live is you can't take a minute to think about it. I'm like, you have to just immediately react. I'm like, I don't know what to say to that.
Right. And if I was in the room with you, we could both take a sip of tea and, just
I'd be
tilt
like,
our heads up. I know.
That's really interesting.
Right. And if I thought it was a particularly good statement, I would just moonwalk out and drop the mic and be like, I'm out.
Yeah. Yeah, I feel like I was a little bit, Carolyn, when we were talking about doing this, I was a little bit like, fuck, I don't know what I can bring to the table other than my dumb Star Wars story. And like, there's so much here.
Man,
like,
I'm sorry, Anita. I was convinced you were going to talk about Ripley. I thought you were going to talk about Fury Road. I was like, oh, I'm ready.
I don't think that that's left reading. I think that Fury Road is, and I made a note to remind me to bring this up, but I don't think it was important, but now I'm doing it. Is that like, there are texts that are clearly like meant to have progressive politics. Like Fury Road 100% does that. I think it fails at doing it. I think it's a shitty movie, but I don't think anyone's left reading onto it. I think that they are taking what was, I don't know, intended, for lack of a better word. Like there's all this stuff around like, we are not things. They're trying to get women out of sexual slavery. Like that's in the text. It's right there. I just think the movie sucks. So like, I think there's a difference between failing at being truly progressive or going the distance with what you're trying to say, versus like it just being kind of generic and us either attaching to it or like Ebony, what you were saying, which is a version of left reading I never thought about before this podcast, was like what we do to justify our watching of troubling media. But feel free to disagree. I mean, obviously.
No, I'm taking a moment to think.
Why Ripley?
Well, in my mind, I was thinking about you and your work on strong female characters. Right, exactly. Right. And so, perhaps not spending so much time on aliens, but just like, okay, again, just making the woman the dispenser of like a whirling dervish of murder energy doesn't make the murder any more justifiable, Like,
totally. Yeah, and I guess I just have had a very narrow definition of left reading. This is like blowing my mind a little bit, because you're right. Like there is like, I don't know. I guess I think it's just different in terms of like, you can, yeah, maybe you're right. Like I'm just a little bit like, yeah, you're right. Like we do ascribe, like, again, this is outdated research, but we do ascribe, especially like feminists or whatever, think that like these badass female chicks who are like violent and stoic and can do everything a male hero can, but in high heels are like the pinnacle of awesome, which is not, this is not a contemporary reading. I understand that. I guess it is a little left reading to be like, that's progress and that's cool or whatever. I just was thinking of it differently. That's all.
Yeah,
it's possible. My definition, the personal definition that I've worked with in my mind, maybe not the traditional defefinition. That's entirely possible as well.
And there might not be a traditional definition.
Right.
And also, like, don't discount the possibility that I just came at the topic with my own patented Ebony sideways reading that has nothing to do with the assignment.
You spent so long talking about these movies. I was like, what is her point? I didn't. And then at the end you said it and I was like, oh, fuck, of course. Like that makes so much sense.
That's how I get you, baby. Listen, I would love to talk about Equalizer 2 with, I tell y'all this every episode. Hit me up on Twitter. I would love to talk about Equalizer 2. Like there's a lot of shit going on in that movie that we need to talk about. The fact that they keep promoting Ta-Nehisi Coates' book as a prop in Between the World and Me. I was just like, okay, Antoine Fuqua has something to say. Somebody please hit me up.
Yeah, I mean, I also, when you were talking, was thinking about like, what's the Keanu movie? John Wick, right? Like I was thinking about like John Wick and also the Fast and the Furious movies. Like there is a space for those movies in this conversation a little bit too. But I also caution us to be like, well, just because problematic movies are popular doesn't mean that we're left reading them. It just means that we're enjoying them for some reason despite the problems.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I do wonder about Fast and the Furious movies which I have only ever seen one, and I've seen, probably the one that, if you're only going to see one is not the one you should see, which is Tokyo Drift.
Oh, God.
I don't know.
but I mean, like, I'm fascinated by the conversation around those films because people talk about them being, like, wholesome and being about family and all kinds of things. And I'm like,
they talk about them being wholesome? Yeah. There's nothing fucking wholesome about this movie.
I mean,
I get it, though.
Yeah. And so that's like, can these films about, like, is there something destabilizing, or challenging to, like, our limited notions of masculinity, in these films? Or
no. But one of the things about Fast and Furious that's so difficult to parse through is how important they are to communities of color and how many people of color are in them. Like that, and like how I think that there are articles that people have written about this because the franchise has been out forever, but like there's no challenges to masculinity. It's just like full force toxic masculinity from top to bottom, right? And it gets us in that, like, I don't know, serotonin or whatever, where we're just like, fast cars driving, vroom vroom, punch the dude. Yeah, you can do this. You're just
this is why I can't
it's like action movie bullshit that gets you sometimes, right? When it's done in a particular way.
I'm a simple human woman, Anita. I think it's really unkind of you to quote back to me verbatim what I said when watching the last Fast Furious movie. Fast car, vroom vroom. All right, look, that was between you and me.
I struggle with this endlessly, like, and I will never stop struggling with this. Like, it's like when we were talking about Concrete Cowboy, like, Idris Elba is hot as fuck, like, just super hot, and you're like, you are a stoic, non-communicative, and this has nothing to do with his character, like, it's just, we have been conditioned to find certain things appealing and attractive and engaging from birth that are really fucking bad. And it's not something you can just let go of right away. And so I really struggle with that when I'm, like, attracted to a character. And I don't just mean, like, physically attracted. I mean, like, find appealing characters that I'm like, everything in my analytical brain is telling me how bad this character, like, how problematic this is for the world, that this character is, like, being celebrated and revered and fetishized and, whatever.
Yeah.
So that's my rant. That had nothing to do with left reading, I don't think. Sorry. But I think left reading, this topic is very related to, like, how we look at media and how we engage with media and what that means for us and what that means for, like, what we want from media too, which is probably a whole nother conversation.
Yeah.
All right. How are you feeling about that, Carol?
Yeah.
Did we do it?
I think we did about as much as we can do in one podcast conversation. I'm pleased with the groundwork that we've laid down here today, and I look forward to Carolyn, us continuing this in our next 10 episodes.
In the script, Carolyn put a little bracket that says "brilliant conversation ensues." So I asked, was that brilliant enough for you, Carolyn?
It'll have to do. Okay.
Fair. All right, y'all. Stay tuned. We'll be back with some freakouts. Hey, are you enjoying the show? If you are, we would love you to support us to keep making it. If you become one of our patrons, not only are you going to do that and allow us to keep making this every week, but also you get access to some perks like bonus episodes, participate in polls to determine future episodes, access to our Discord server, which is only available to patrons, and, other things. If you love us, help support us. You can do that at patreon.com/femfreak. What's your freak out? Now it's time to talk about what's been thrilling us, moving us, upsetting us, or infuriating us this past week. Am I the only one with a freak out?
I think so.
Yeah, because my freak out would just be watching John Wick 2 again. Nobody wants to hear what I have to say about that.
I bet a lot of people do, but save it for the bonus.
Okay.
I mean, you can if you want. Okay.
No,
I watched a movie last night called Shoplifters by Hirokazu Koreeda. It's a 2018 Japanese film, and between that and Home, I have now decided that my like favorite film wheelhouse is stunningly beautiful and off kilter. Like that is how I'm now going to describe my favorite films. Because this movie is so beautiful. Like, and not even in the way, not even in the way that you're like, oh, these sweeping landscapes and the da-da-da-da-da. Just like the shots are so fascinating and there's so much storytelling happening in them. But the whole story just is a little off kilter in this way that like keeps you on, not on edge in a suspenseful way, but you're a little bit like, what's going on? Who are these people? And it's so good. And so it's about a family. It opens with this beautiful sequence of this father and son who are like, have a whole rhythm to shoplifting. And it's just, like, I immediately fell in love with the movie just like within the first 5 minutes of it. But it really dives into kind of what is family? How does family survive? Like the family that we're watching is not conventional. They're poor or working class. Like they're all kind of struggling a little bit, and it's really lovely. I highly recommend it. I was watching it. I was like, is this a Carol movie? Do I like Carol movies now?
I have not.
I don't think it's a Carol movie, but I think you would really like it, Carolyn.
Yeah, I have not seen Shoplifters, but I have seen other. It's been on my list ever since I first heard about it years ago. So, and I've seen other films by Koreeda that I've really, really enjoyed. So I definitely want to check this one out.
I've heard very good, like, I'm just now, like, all in, because a friend of mine is just, like, 3 for 3. His films are amazing that I've seen, so I'd like to check out more. It is currently, Shoplifters is on Hulu right now, so if you have that is a place that you can watch it, cool. And let me know what you think. Cool thing, we have a guest freak out this week.
I believe it's Alex Pereira from Brazil.
Alex is from Brazil, and they said that they needed a break from what he said specifically. My country is on fire and I needed some escapism. So check this freakout out.
Hey, Feminist Frequency. Here's Alex Pereira from Brazil. I had to send this because I'm freaking out about a webcomic recently released in a 2-volume graphic novel called Check Please. It is truly great. It's done by Ngoti Ukazu. Sorry if I'm mispronouncing. It tells the story of Eric Beadle, a young gay hockey player who has to face a whole new world when he enrolls in the hockey team in college. It's great. It has heart. It's wholesome. I can't avoid but keep thinking about the beautiful, beautiful story that's told in this webcomic. So Check Please is my freak out. Peace. Kisses from Brazil.
Thank you so much for sharing that with us. If y'all want to submit your own freak out and maybe get it on our show, you can do that at feministfrequency.com/freakout. That's FREQOUT. Thank you so much for listening to Feminist Frequency Radio. Attentive listeners may recall that we were going to talk about Falcon and the Winter Soldier this week, but then we realized that there's just one more episode one more week, which is one more episode until the finale. So now we're just going to talk about the whole fucking show next week. How about that? It's going to be delightful. I love it so much.
You're just a huge fan. Huge
fan. It's so good.
And I think it's because she's left reading it, though. She sees nothing but really progressive politics in it. And I'm like, Anita, I don't know if the show is really as progressive as you think it is. I mean, the villains, they want like a world without borders, but they kill people, and he's like, no, it's brilliant. It's perfect. So we're gonna get into it next week.
We should do a spoof episode where we just try and left read everything.
Oh,
and like try to pretend to love the crap we don't. I think that'd be super interesting. Nobody else wants to do this. It's fine. Okay. Also,
the idea it could be an April Fool. We missed April Fools this year, but maybe next year we'll keep that one in the back pocket for next year.
Or we could just tell people it's a spoof. I think if you would like us to do a spoof episode, hit us up.
All right.
This candid camera ass way of programming.
Well, it's not that much better than how we actually program. Anyways, nobody needs to know that. If you are a patron or want to be a patron, please go to our Patreon page, which is patreon.com/femfreak, and you can help us determine our next People's Choice episode. The theme is bad mothers. All right, y'all. Our show is engineered by Rob Para. Carrie Stimson provides technical support, artwork by Jamie Varon, and our intro music is by Phil Circus. Thanks for listening.
Bye.
Bye.